setting the scene for today's discussions. There's a lot there for us to build on as we move into the panel sessions throughout the day. And I think the What Matters to You initiative that you have is really at the heart of Care Opinion. And if we truly are listening to what matters to the consumers, no doubt we will influence their experience of care and it will lead to better health outcomes. So with that, I would like to move to our first panel discussion and explore how consumers' voice is being embedded in governance and engagement and what that looks like in practice across the different parts of the health system. We're joined by a panel bringing a range of perspectives from across the system, from executive leadership through to lived experience. Joining us today, we have Alicia Michelini, Executive Director, Goldfield. So if you would like to make your way to the stage, Alicia. We have Sarah Louise Lang, Acting Executive Director, Armidale Kalamunda Group. We have Gloria Jacob, Chairperson, East Pilbara District Health Advisory Council. We also have joining us Richard Newman, Chief Executive Officer, Carers WA. Please make them welcome. Yeah, come and sit nice and close. That's it. Okay, welcome to our panelists. And I do have a set of questions which I can start with, and then as we're going through these questions and responses, please think of any other questions that you may have that you would like to ask all of them, or anyone specifically as well. So we might start with Gloria, if that's okay. Sorry, Gloria.
It's okay, Tina. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome. So before we start, just to give you some context, over 6,000 stories published on Care Opinion relate to experiences with wax, with over 60% of those being wholly positive. We also often hear from consumers that they were encouraged by staff to share their stories. From your perspective, what is it about the way Care Opinion is being used in wax, including how frontline staff are engaging with it, that has led to so many people sharing their stories?
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you very much for giving consumers a voice on this panel. I guess why people feel they can share is largely based around Care Opinion is viewed, I suppose, more of a feedback mechanism, an invite to provide your stories, provide your feedback, rather than a complaint system. And I think it works, Fraser mentioned it, in whole with other mechanisms, because not everybody, Care Opinion is a digital platform, but not coming from the Pilbara in particular, not everybody communicates in that way. But the staff, encouraging feedback helps a lot. And with regards to staff, the frontline staff in particular are key to this. If they feel like they can encourage people and use that feedback as not a complaint, but more of a continuous improvement, they allow people to tell our stories in our words and feel like there's confidence in the system that somebody is listening. So that is really important. And I guess when the staff, especially in the responses, and Alicia, your responses are key, they feel like they're being listened to. Our stories are being listened to. The service is reflecting on what we're telling them, and then we're respected as well. So there's respect happening with that. And I think key to this is also the anonymity, that care opinion. We don't have to identify ourselves. We can say it in our words. We feel there's confidence for us to tell our stories. So I think that's chief.
That's wonderful. So really, your staff embrace obtaining the feedback, and by welcoming the feedback, it's increasing consumers and encouraging them to share openly. So building on that, Alicia, when services invite people to continue the conversation offline after sharing their story, we often see quite different levels of people being willing to make contact. What has your experience been, and what do you think influences whether people take that next step?
Thanks. I think that interestingly, it's this part of it is the structure of the service itself. So as we know, Care Opinion is an anonymous feedback platform, as you mentioned, Gloria, but it's actually still allows two-way communication. So oftentimes we can receive, you know, one of the feedback forms, a letter, and it'll say, you know, please, there's no need to respond, and it can even be done anonymously. But Care Opinion actually still allows for that two-way communication to take place straight away. As has been mentioned today, overwhelmingly, so much of the feedback that we get on Care Opinion is positive. And in fact, even it can be mixed. So we can get from one story, we can get some positive feedback and some negative feedback all at once. So what I found though is when I've spoken to people that have reached out afterwards, is I realised that there's quite often so much fear from the consumer, from the carer, or from the community member in raising and telling their story. And Care Opinion really does give them that opportunity to tell it in their own words, and to really ensure that it's put straight through to the health service and for everybody to see. I've had the experience where most of the people that have reached out afterwards were actually the critical 4 and 5 stories. So most commonly, it's the people that have had a really difficult and challenging and hard experience that they've come forward and told us about. And I think that the platform actually allows for us to respond in a way where we're not defensive. We get straight to we've heard you, and we would actually like to see that improve. And it still has a personalisation element, even though it's anonymous. It's still quite incredible. I find, you know, I hit the read aloud function, and I find actually every time I read a response, it feels like a person is reaching out and speaking. And I always, you know, make a point of reading aloud my responses so I can actually think, what's it like for the person hearing this? Have I actually listened to what they've had to say? And so I think that platform and that two-way communication really supports it. And people have wanted to reach out and be heard. And from then what I found is that often I will go into you know, meeting with people. And like I said, most of the people that I've had reach out are the Crit 4-5 stories. So they've had a really difficult experience. And often there's a lot of fear about them coming and speaking to people from the health service, and even more so returning and re-engaging with the health service. And so, you know, opening that communication and following it through. Oftentimes I'd always want to come up with the solution of how do I fix this, or how do I find the answer that actually it didn't really happen that way. And that was, you know, just of a personal, like that's often the you came to. But having been through the experience a few times, what I found now is just listening, and most people just want to be heard. They just want to tell their experience. They just want to hear that, I'm sorry that it happened to you. Thank you for coming forward. I always think I'm sorry and thank you are two ways to open and close every conversation. But what you find when you're talking with them and hearing about what has mattered and what it has meant, solutions, improvements and positive steps really do come to the fore. We've had people that have had exceptionally difficult birth experiences, and out of that we now have a debriefing clinic that's offered to every woman that comes in that has had a you know, an emergency event or difficult part of their birthing experience, and the uptake and the feedback that's led to positive feedback again and again and again. So it can be really big changes that advocate for the service. And that's the other thing, the people that have had such difficult experience, I've seen on Facebook on our community pages, because I know who they are now because I was working with them, advocating and saying, just reach out, put a care opinion post, someone will get in touch, someone will help you with your next step the next time you want to engage with the service. So these people that had such a difficult experience now become the biggest advocates for their local community, their local consumers and their local health services, and I found that very wonderful.
Thank you for sharing that, and also for closing the loop. So sharing an example of how change from a negative experience leads to positive experience for those thereafter. That's a really nice segue to the next question for Sarah Louise. When stories come through and you're responding to these stories, what approach do you take to ensure your response feels genuine and person-centred?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So I think the most important thing for me is, reading through the story and just sitting in the space, actually. I think hearing the information from our consumers, our patients, our carers, it's very meaningful to hear it in this way. And what I try to do with, of course, our patient experience teams and our quality and safety teams around how we respond is getting to the core of the issue. So I think everyone will provide their narrative in their own way. And so really scrutinising what people will provide, because they will do it in a different way and everyone communicates differently. So trying to understand what that means and get to the core issue. And I think it's always important for me to ensure that we convey a very genuine empathy and concern and acknowledgement of whatever has been provided, whether it's positive feedback, whether it's concern about their care, and just, I think, responding in a meaningful way so that people feel heard. That's the most important thing, I feel. If required, I will ask questions. I think it's important sometimes to get to the core of the issue. And I know it's not about individual patient stories sometimes, and it's about hearing what people are saying. But sometimes I think it is important to go back and ask the question. It's one of our tools in our tool belt and how we can hear what people are saying. So I think it's important to go back there. So they're the main things. And I think looking overall in our response, a very empathetic and meaningful response is important.
Thanks, Sarah Louise. And I think we'll delve into that a little bit more later. I mean, it's one thing to try and be empathetic in your response and person-centered, but what has it taken to be able to build the skills, the confidence, I suppose experience in being able to do that well?
I guess it sort of comes from all my experience dealing with consumers in the clinical space, but also hearing from our teams and how they work. And like I say, sitting in the space, I think if you're able to convey that in the way you're delivering the written word back, it takes experience and sort of leaning into that to convey the message. I like what you were just saying about the hearing the words. I think I'm going to use that tool. I think that was really
such a good tool.
That was a really good method. I think reading things, you can hear things and try and see in between the words as well. And I think that would really help with that message.
Even reading your response, your own out loud, to see how it would actually come out if you were to convey that verbally. Yeah, it's really powerful. Thank you. And Richard, bringing the carer perspective, how can health services ensure they are upholding carers' rights to be recognised and heard while appropriately navigating confidentiality when responding to the feedback and stories?
Thanks, Tina. That's pretty much a layered question, so I wonder if I could probably layer the answer. First of all, it's about grounding in carer reality, and carers are often the constant between a system that can seem periodic or sporadic or even fragmented. And so they quite often notice changes within systems more than people who actually work in those systems. So they're a rich source of intelligence, and I think we should look at that feedback loop as a source of intelligence rather than just perhaps people telling us their thoughts and their feelings as well. So when we look at the rights and the recognition, it's, and as we hear this all the time, but it's vitally important that we actually explicitly ask people for their feedback. Quite often it's taken as a given. We have a mechanism for gaining it or obtaining it, but we don't actually articulate that explicitly we want people to be part of that process. And it should never be seen as a barrier. And quite often we use confidentiality and privacy as a barrier by saying we can't explain or we can't expose too much information. It shouldn't be used as a barrier. It should be used as a workaround, I think. Saying things we can't share details, but this is what we see, this is what we're hearing. Is that correct? And also responding to feedback well. It is about closing that loop. It is about circling back to what the original issues and concerns are about. So carers are often seen as a peripheral in that caring relationship. And I think we need to clearly articulate that carers are part of that and an equal partnership in that relationship. And as I said right at the beginning, they quite often see and hear and notice things that people working in the system don't. So they're a rich source of intelligence.
They are indeed. I do have more questions, but I will pause there and turn to the audience and to see whether you have any questions for any or all of the panelists. Are there any questions? Yes. If we might be able to use one of the mics.
Thanks very much. I'm Kerry Wilcox with South Metro. Now that Sarah Louise has handed her microphone over, I'm going to ask her a question. I suppose part of what we all deal with, and it's been mentioned about how do we get the understanding of the care opinion feedback, the language used and the responses from the operational staff on the floor in what we all experience every day, particularly at the moment, how complex the system is and how very, very busy all of the staff are. And so Sarah Louise, I suppose, given your roles, how do you manage to get the operational level staff, the nurse manager and the CN group and those level staff to really look at and engage and understand?
That's a really good question.
If you want to repeat the question, or I'm happy to repeat it so our friends online can hear.
So Kerry asked around how do we get the operational coalface staff voice in the response. That is a really good question, and I think that's something that's always been important to me in all my roles, is to understand the experience. I think, but also conversely, to get the frontline staff to understand the patient experience. I think a lot of the, and in the formal feedback process that we have through our patient experience teams, a lot of the times the staff will come back, because it always goes to the nurse unit manager, or it goes to the head of the department, or it goes to the catering manager, or it goes to whoever. And a lot of the time, the response you'll get, it's very process driven. It's very, oh, that doesn't meet with the Work Health Safety Act, and it, you know, those types of things. We've blocked the door, and et cetera, et cetera. But my response when I get that feedback from our clinicians and our teams is, I think we're missing the empathy there. And I know I've used that word a lot, but it's core of who I am as a human and how we're treating our humans and caring for our humans. So I try to go back and, because I think the context is important and it can explain things, but at the end of the day, the people are providing their experience and the humans are telling us how they felt. And sometimes a policy or procedure just really isn't going to help with that. So yeah, that's what I try to do. And I try to put myself back in that space, even that's a while ago. And understand where they're coming from as well. But then also use some of my own experiences as a patient or a client or a consumer or however, to inform how I might share the story with our clinicians and our teams. Like, if you were that person sitting in the waiting room for 8 hours and no one talked to you, would you be cross about that? Probably. Or, if you're at the cafe and the barista isn't even like acknowledging you, that makes you cross, right? So how do you, I try and make it relevant to people's experience, because I think you just get super caught up. So that is what I try to do. Sometimes I think it's heard, and yeah, but also acknowledging, I think people hear a lot of the hard stuff, but also so always sharing the great stuff and how it makes them feel, so.
Just building on that, would you do that organically throughout the day as required, or is there specific times allocated to doing it?
Oh, I'd like to think I had allocated time. No, it's all, we're very fortunate that in my areas I have patient experience teams and quality and safety people that help me to get there and be timely, and because I think that's actually one of the most important things is timely response.
Absolutely.
And even if you don't have all the information, just being like, I've heard you, thank you. But yes, absolutely. I'll go find someone, that's related to and be like, oh, hey, that, can we just, how else can we respond to this in a way that's meaningful? Yeah.
So embedding into everyday practice. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, down the front here.
Hi guys, so I'm Kylie. I'm a maternity consumer representative and the consumer lead on the new Women's and Babies Hospital project. And I have a question for Alicia or Gloria around, sorry guys, just around some of the consumers that I speak to in regional remote areas. There is a real fear to use care opinion because it's in some small towns it's not actually anonymous, and they're quite fearful that if they put in their story on care opinion, it's going to be quite quickly recognisable by the clinicians, but they do want their story to be heard or improvements to be made at their local service. Have you got any suggestions for those consumers to alleviate that fear, or any ideas on how to encourage those consumers in those small towns to still use care opinion?
Oh, I'm happy to go first as a consumer. I think that's where I really appreciate the fact that the District Health Advisory Councils exist. I think we are in amongst the community, and a lot of the people on our council in particular, they're trusted members generally, and they're on there to provide that two-way feedback on. And it's not about just, I think what people inside of the system need to is welcome feedback as not complaints. It's a chance to improve. And I think that's really important. If the service listens and reflects and then sort of acts or changes are made, then I think consumers feel like, but I get your pain about the small fishbowl we all live in. And you are absolutely right about most people know everybody. But that if you feel like there's somebody that you can trust, whether it's through the care opinion, I feel if the system says, give us your feedback, we're not going to blame you. It is, you feel more confident and trust. And that only comes from when I come to the service and the service says, I've had a bad experience, but the service says, provide us that feedback. Let's see what we can do. That welcoming, that feedback makes a huge difference. And I know it doesn't exist, but it's a work in progress like everything. So DHACs, trusted members of the community that everybody knows by name. Hey, Glor, I had this, well, I'll tell you an example. I've got a friend who went down to Newman. Now, Newman's 400 k's away from us, 400 and plus k's away from us. attended there with real serious pain, got discharged and was told, oh, she wanted to stay in, but was told, oh, you're fine, go. Had to get back to Headland, drive that car with her back issue, then got admitted into ED straight away when she landed here. Now, things like that, they don't write on Care Opinion, but they came back and says, Glor. And you know what was really, really heartening for me? Dr. Annie Lang, up in, and I'm name dropping, yes. I mentioned it to her and I said, what are we doing about transport when people, you know, and you're not going to have RFDS, you're not going to have an AMBO go out, you know, and drive you 400 Ks. So then she contacted the young lady and had a conversation about that. And then, you know, the conversation started. We're not asked, they just want to be heard. And I think that's really important.
Thanks, Gloria. No, that's all right. I think the strength and the value that our district health advisory councils bring for country consumers and the voices of people is so critical. I'd also just encourage Kylie that people reach out and say, I want to tell my story, but I'm not sure where to start. Could someone get in touch with me? And I think, you know, again, we always try and provide a contact and a person, you know, photo and a name for that response, and then follow through that person is the one to contact. And I think that could start with a conversation. And I can really understand why people, especially in country towns and small communities, why they're really scared and hesitant. I think we are really breaking it down though and trying to move away from the us and them. And I think we've had some really great successes where when we talk with carers and consumers and members of the community, that when they have built up the confidence and we've heard their story and then actually said to them, would you like to speak to the people involved in the care, or we can pass that through. What I found is the clinicians often know things were challenging and difficult. They want to learn, they want to improve, and they're actually afraid of reaching out and the same thing. So, you know, I just really welcome people to just start the conversation, and it's a responsibility of people like myself in the senior positions as well to really empower our team members to make sure we're supporting consumers that do that. So that's a responsibility that I definitely take on, and I think that's where we need to really make sure that the platform, the voice and the message that we've heard today about the importance of consumer and carer input really holds fast.
I think something really important with regards to these smaller communities is the way that news travels. So if a consumer is empowered to share their voice and they get a good experience, the services are more open to it, then they share that with their neighbour and with their friends. So within that community, like a ripple effect, it will be. We have a culture created here with our health services that are open to hearing the feedback. So hopefully over time that culture is embedded within these small communities, empowering them to share. Please.
Hi, I'm Claire from Health Consumers Council. Touching on that, then building on the questions so far, one of the things I'm struck by is that particularly when a system is in high demand, there's a lot of pressure, and people are working flat out. To get feedback that's less than positive can, I imagine, be quite challenging. I know it is for me. Like sometimes I might be inclined to go, oh, for God's sake, like I'm doing my best. But I have an experience of me giving some feedback to some health, in a healthcare setting where I'd been hearing some things from the community, and I shared it with a group of staff, and I sort of said, oh, well, I've been hearing that people would like more about this. And I had two responses in the room. One person went, well, that's not right, because we're really good at that. And the other person said, that's really interesting, because I would have said we're really good at that. But that's obviously not what people are experiencing. And I guess I'm interested in your perspectives as, you know, people within organisations, and how do we support everyone to be able to tolerate feedback that is less than positive, but that has nuggets of importance that can be used as a learning moment. Because I guess what I observed in that encounter that I had was, you know, sort of somebody probably pretty exhausted and someone able to draw on a bit more reserves and not take it so personally. So I think it's really important for all sorts of consumer feedback. And I think my observation too is very often, I think consumers, and particularly when they're on, perhaps on councils or committees, sometimes feel they have to really manage how they give the feedback so that it's able to be heard in a way that's not taking offence. What can we do to support that more, like you say, that openness, that curiosity, rather than really we're doing our best?
Can I get started? Is that all right? Yeah. You made me realise that curiosity and compassion are two of the values for WA Country Health Service, and I think that there's a real reason for that, and it's really needed particularly, like we said, in country areas. Oftentimes, you're only 1 degree separation away from the person that was the client, the person that was the staff member. They usually know each other as well. I would sort of speak to some of the processes that WA Country Health Service have actually put in place since over the past 10 years as well. I mean, we have a patient experience and consumer or community engagement team as well, very small, but the work that they do is so powerful and actually proactive, and Care Opinion's one of the platforms and one of the tools that's really used to drive that and that they've supported, but that real empowering people and the strength that comes from teaching our staff and teaching our consumers not to take it personally, and that to lean into that curiosity. And I actually think that you've got an opportunity every time that there's an engagement on a platform, but also proactively as well, that as health services, we actually need to be responsible for training, teaching, supporting our clinicians and our staff members, our non-clinical staff as well. Don't be afraid, don't be defensive, actually listen, be curious, be compassionate. There's always two sides to the story, and you won't get in trouble, because I think that's often been a big part of it, is that when people go into a bureaucratic and hierarchical organisation, you know, we're trained from childhood to think we're going to get in trouble. So it's really proactively working through that and empowering people. And I think we've come so far. But I think that's one of the really important strategies to take through into the next 10 years as well.
Thank you for that. I do have a question from online guests. So thank you, Tony, for your question. It is to any of the panel members. On occasions, clinicians are concerned with the content of the Care Opinion story, but can't work out who the patient is from the information. Any suggestions on how this could be minimised? So it is anonymous.
I can take that one to begin with. I think that's a good question, Tony. And I think when I first started reading Care Opinions, I was like, oh, who was that? Oh my gosh, how can I find out who that was? And I think I've kind of shifted my perception of reading them. So it's more about hearing their story and understanding that they are trying to tell us as an organisation in a way that feels comfortable for them. They're giving their feedback about how they, whether it's, positive or, some constructive feedback in a way that is meaningful to them, accessible to them. But we always do pop something down at the bottom, which is, we do have our formal processes. If there's anything else that you'd like to engage with us, then we'd love to hear from you. Sometimes, though, there are really concerning things. And I know that they're moderated by Care Opinion and, depending on their criticality and all those types of things. And if there is anything that I feel like I need to know, I will strongly encourage people to give that feedback, either in a different way, in a way that they can feel comfortable doing, lots of different avenues, whether they want a phone call or, whatever. Because going from clinician to manager to leader, you're like, oh my God, how can I make that better? Or that was a terrible experience for them, and think about the individual, which I think is important, but it's almost about the greater good as well, and those themes and narratives. But sometimes you're like, I think you've got to check yourself as well, and going back to the previous question, sitting in that space, it's like, it's not always personal. This is their experience. Just sitting with that and understanding the experience is part of it, and trying to put yourself in that, I think is important. But thank you, Tony.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the question, Tony. I think Fraser also alluded to this. The first thing that comes to our mind is who left who could that be? But if we have a shift in that mindset, it's about the story. Let's listen to what it's trying to tell us rather than who is trying to say it. So what we might do is thank our panelists for sharing their insights, for their openness, and for really being champions, being leaders in the work that you do to amplifying the consumer voice and supporting us to be responsive to consumer needs. We will take a 10-minute break and then reconvene. So thank you very much.